Did you get those screenshots that I sent you on your phone?
Were
I'm
they
gonna take that as a no.
were they sent by email or text?
Text.
Well, if they're text, I can find them. Okay. Something that says the APA with the collaboration of moneyed interests. Is that it?
Yeah.
Successful in redefining what it means to be a human being. Meanwhile, 20 years of peak psychiatry has resulted in a 30% increase in suicides in the United States. And the American psychiatry has absolutely nothing constructive to say about it. Please tell me what I've missed. Wow, that he's on the fucking money, that's for sure. Many billions of dollars are spent each year in an industry built on a corrupt body of pseudoscience, cultivated and exploited by moneyed interests for decades. The scientific fraud has been more successful than any other our day. Our diagnoses are contrived by our guilt. This guy is honest. He'll go to jail for this.
He's a psychiatrist, if I'm not mistaken.
He's right on the moon. 30% more suicides. Wow.
Now there are those that argue
that's progress.
Well, but that's correlation is not causation, and that you really can't say that that's the reason. Well, okay. However, the situation remains that the whole system is still guessing at where these maladaptive patterns come from. From whence do they arise? It's a guess. I was speaking last night with a psychologist, I believe, some kind of counselor, a counseling person, and she was talking about this fellow that had extreme PTSD. He's been depressed for years and years and years, and he just can't keep a therapist. He goes through his therapist like a lawnmower cutting grass. And I said, well, how is he doing with you? And she says, well, he's been with me for a good while, longer than any of his other therapists. And I said, well, how's he doing? She says, well, he keeps showing up. He keeps coming in. We're making some progress.
I got this sucker fooled, right?
Yeah. That's kind of rude, but yeah, that. So the question must arise, based on your experience and developing the optimal human experience, where do these maladaptive patterns arise? There must be a.
Let's talk about suicide. You want to talk about suicide?
I want to talk about the fundamental premises of optimal human experience and the foundation of where these patterns come from.
You're coming from the isness of your being. That's what I hear you saying. You're coming from the isness of your being.
Well, it sounds like you pulled that right out of your ass, but maybe
that was a set of nonsense syllables that floated around est for a while.
Oh, yes.
Remember that one?
Yeah, well, it depends on what the definition of is legally.
I was at an S training, and this guy, he everything in his life was just totally screwed. And he stood up and he was really distraught. He said, look, I've come here. My life is in ruins. I don't know where to turn. Please just tell me what to do in straightforward language without all of the S jargon. Just tell me straightforward. I need good advice. And the instructor said, all right, I'm going to tell you, and I want you to take this to heart. When you get to the point where you can really accept the validity of the experience of others, as well as yourself, and moderate the two, in a way that is absolutely meaningful for you, then at that point, the understanding will arise and come out of your mind and your unconscious, and then you'll have the kind of understanding and you'll get it. You'll get it.
You'll get it. And then at that point,
he had
so-
he had a psychotic break right in front of 300 people, and they had to take him out. They had to lead him out. 2 or 3 Estes got him by the arm and let him out because he just simply melted.
you mean that clear explanation didn't do it for him?
It really didn't. One of the things that I like to present is that all of this is not all that difficult to understand. Notwithstanding the fundamental rule that Richard Bandler himself gave me, and that is, talk is cheap, except when you buy it from me. All right, this is not all that difficult. I was in Miami, and I had gotten back from the Dominican Republic where I was in medical school, and I had several Dominican friends, and one of them was Dr. Araceli's Cruz, and the other one was, I can't remember. These were MDs, and they were in Miami. They were Dominican doctors with licenses in the Dominican Republic. They didn't have licenses in the United States, so they were doing things like doing sonograms and working medical clinics. And they brought me a gal named Dora. And Dora was 40 years old. She had turned 40 years the preceding week, and her boyfriend told her they were Colombians. Her boyfriend said, "You're too old for me now. I'm dumping you. I no longer want you as my girlfriend." And she was devastated. And she went into a deep depression, and she was suicidal. She wouldn't wash, she wouldn't eat, she'd barely talk, she'd barely move around. So they brought her to me, and they said to me in Spanish, they said, "Is there anything you can do?" And I said, "Well, I was experimenting with prenatal reimprinting." So I just said to her, okay, I put her down and said in my broken Spanish, I said, "Put your head down and put your hands like this, and like you're un bebé en el estómago de su madre, like a baby in the mother's stomach." And she did. And I said, "¿Qué pasó con sus padres? ¿Qué pasó?" And she said, "My people are poor people back in the mountains of Colombia. They barely have enough to eat. They have 6 children, and they do not want, nor can they afford, another hijo, another child." And I said, how severe are things? She said, they don't have enough to eat. And she was crying with her head down. And it was a very, very sad moment. And I said, "What did you learn from this? ¿Qué usted aprendes de este momento?" What did you learn in this moment? And she said, "Cuando hay problemas, mejor que me muere. Quiero morir." She said, "When there are problems, it's better if I die, if I'm not here." And that was the complex generalization, and that was the initial imprinting experience, the early imprinting experience. And so in neurolinguistic programming, humans represent their experience visually, auditorily, kinesthetically, olfactory, gustatory, muscle movement, motor movement, vestibular, and the extrasomatic information system called human language. And so I used neurolinguistic programming to alter the structure of the complex generalization of that early primary initial imprinting experience. And she came out of that regression like that. I mean, it was astonishing. But as time goes by, I've worked with a number of people who were suicidal, and without exception, there is some kind of imprint that they will have. The parents they're strapped for cash. Things aren't right. There's no support from the extended family, and the prenate will get, "It'd be better if I wasn't here." And so many times I'll have people in the adult state, and they'll come in, they'll be depressed, and I'll say, you're not supposed to be here, are you?" And they'll say, "No, I'm not supposed to be here." And you're familiar with a shoehorn. A shoehorn takes something pre-existing and enables you to put something into it and extend it and change it. a foot without a shoe is very different than a foot with a shoe on it.
Right.
So I'd say to them, say to me, I'm not supposed to be here. And they would, in tears, gut-wrenching pain and sorrow, despair. They'd say, I'm not supposed to be here. And then I'd say, now say, as long as I'm here, I'm going to have a heck of a good time. And that would change that complex generalization. It would change that representation. The linguistics would change, and they would come out of a deep depression that they had had all their life at a neurological level. You've got your frontal orbital projections, the frontal cortex, you've got the parietal lobe, you've got the temporal lobe where language is stored. And then deep inside of there, the brain, you've got the lenticular nucleus, the amygdala, the all of these deep phylogenetically old structures. And that I call the preconscious state, the preconscious and anatomical structures where the prenatal presuppositions are stored. And of course, you can't get there with your eyes like here. As soon as the axis between your external auditory meatus and the corner of the eye goes below the horizon, bam, you gain access to the deep paleocortical structures, and you can reprogram the entire brain. So without exception, I would say to them, you're not supposed to be here. And they'd say, I'm not supposed to be here. And I'd say to me, I'm not supposed to be here. And I would do it 3 times, which is the convincer mechanism, because I want to gain access to as many neurons in the deep paleocortical structures as possible. And then I would say, I'm not supposed to be here. Repeat after me. I'm not supposed to be here, but as long as I'm here, I'm going to have a heck of a good time. And bam, they would have smoke come out of their ears and nose, and their eyes would go around in circles. And they would take a deep breath and blow off carbon dioxide as the sympathetic system of the adrenals and the parasympathetic system, the alarm and the relaxation systems came into balance, and they normalized the neurophysiology. And without exception, literally without exception, I've never seen this fail to work with people who are suicidal.
Wow. Just to go back just a second, you mentioned the external auditory meatus, which is the ear hole, as I recall.
The ear hole, but when you spend thousands of dollars on a professional education that includes an app, you don't call it the ear hole.
You can't say ear hole.
No.
Okay, well,
but does that make sense?
That makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. And so, ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Joe Diruzzo, and
a short clip.
And if you want to learn more, the new website is optimalhumanexperience.com, and we will do some more of this shortly.
I would love to teach this to people. When you see that the suicides are up 30% in the last few years, that is absolutely indicative of a complete failure of the system. Just a complete failure. I'd like to say a few more words.
Well, who's to stop you?
There's, well, this whole thing about prenatal reimprinting and the various brain levels, there is a phenomenon known as athetosis. And athetosis is pathology of the deep paleocortical structures. And it's involved with motor movements. Oddly enough, guess who had athetosis, which is snake-like movements?
Who?
Adolf Hitler. So Adolf Hitler would go to some place where they were having, the white supremacy Olympics, and he would sit there and he would start going like this. He'd be going on. And that was Adolf Hitler. And of course, they had to make sure that the cameras were not on him at the time. And he would go into his athetotic, snake-like movements. And then he would come out of it and he'd be fine, except he wasn't in a good mood when he'd come out. He'd go and order, the execution of a couple million Jews. But, whatever makes you feel better, in the end. So the deep paleocortical structures, the limbic system, the actually not the limbic system, the lenticular nucleus, and all of those, the really deep phylogenetic structures. Well, I had a fellow come in one time, and you're aware of the I-accessing cues of that popularized in neurolinguistic programming by John Gurdner and Richard Bandler. So this guy comes in and I say, how can I help you? And he says, well, I don't know if you can help me, but I'm depressed. And they told me that you work with people and I'd like to have you work with me. And I said, really? Well, tell me about being depressed. He said, well, I just feel depressed. I said, well, when's the last time you saw your mother's house? And he went, well, a couple of weeks ago. I said, what are you going to do tomorrow? He said, well, I'm going to go to the movies with my kids. I said, well, how do you feel about going to the movies? He said, I think I feel okay. I said, well, how do you feel about your mother's house? Well, I think I feel okay about it. I said, what's down here? And he said, nothing. And I said, what's going on with you in terms of psychiatry? He said, oh, I'm on heavy sedatives. I'm on antidepressants. So the fascinating thing about prenatal reimprinting theory is that it corresponds with what we see in terms of the neurophysiology of the I-accessing cues. This person who was told that they were depressed, but didn't know for sure one way or the other, did not look down into the right and check out their feelings. Mm-hmm. I asked him repeatedly. I pointed down. He would not look down there. So as I worked with people, and I realized that there were a lot of people who had tremendous pain encoded in the kinesthetic system. A lot of that was from the prenatal experience. They learned not to look down and to the right because it didn't feel good and they didn't want to go there. This was such a predominant feature that I actually developed a nomenclature that describes this. I refer to this. Are you familiar with Lawrence of Arabia?
Yes.
You know, it may seem like a disjointed conversation, but it's not. Where did Lawrence of Arabia hang out?
I'm going to guess, take a wild guess. It's been a while since Lawrence and I,
shouldn't be all that
communicated.
hard.
I'm going to say it's kind of like one of those Grant's Tomb questions. I'm going to say Arabia.
64,000. Yes, you win. He hung out in Arabia. What is the part of Arabia where it never rains and nobody goes there? Because if you go in, you're not coming out. It's called the,
I don't know,
Forbidden Quarter.
Ah, okay.
And so I would say to people who are like suicidally depressed and taking 20 or 30 grams of antidepressants to get through the day, I'd say, what's down and to your right? And they'd go, I don't go there. We don't talk about that.
It's the Forbidden Quarter.
I came to call it the Forbidden Quarter. Yeah.
Wow.
So when you look at people, you can tell the degree to which they can access a kinesthesia and correlate, visual, auditory, past, future ideas. How does that feel? Well, if they can't do that, they don't know how it feels, right? And so when you talk to people who are mentally ill, criminally insane, morally unfit, violently mentally ill, you're going to see that they don't go down there all that often, if ever. And what you find out with the prenatal reimprinting technology, with neurolinguistic programming, with psychiatry, which, by any rational standards is approaching a complete failure, at least in the area of suicide, it all fits. Let me think first. Yeah, it all fits together. Yep, it does. It all makes sense.
How do you feel about it, though?
Well, I think about the past and I think about what's going to go on in the future. I ask myself, is this good? And I have a good feeling about prenatal reimprinting and teaching it to people. Isn't that elegant? I mean, you can even get all of it non-verbally, and there it is in all of nature's magnificence. We came from nature, we return to nature, and in the end, nature is all there is. So that's what I have to say about suicidal depression. There's many different types of suicidal depression, but ultimately, if you go, what you'll find is that these people have got terrible feelings in the area for an ordinarily organized, neurologically organized right-handed individual. is characteristically accessed by eyes down and to the right. Dr. Joe Diruzzo with prenatal reimprinting, hoping to make some sense out of all the things that you've wondered about for all these years. Hope you join us again, and hope you take the training to learn how to deal with various forms of depression. It'll put a smile on your face. You may be unconscious, but it'll still make you smile. Part of the training is to help you learn how to smile more. Thanks again.
Ladies and gentlemen, Dr. Joe Diruzzo, optimalhumanexperience.com. We'll see you next time.